So hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I've just finished a 19-hour cycling week in the Alps, and I'm going to tell you in this video why I wasn't able to ride the CRW Ultra Bling wheels at all, but they did do 5,000 kilometers in the back of the car. It is a bit of a point of contention because I don't want to obviously destroy any relationship with Joe. I think he's doing a great job. I think he's doing an absolutely game-changing job in this Pandapodium approach to giving us the best product from China. But if you're going to send them to Peak Talk, you're going to get found out. You're going to get caught out like on day one. A little first look at something pretty special. And according to Joe from China Cycling, this is the next game-changing wheel set. This is the CRW craft racing wheels that he is pumping hard on his website. But this is a 28 on the Craft Racing Works, and the transition is really good. This is a 21mm internal. There is a much fatter one, but I asked not to send that one because I'm going to use these for kind of fast road. I don't want anything too wide on the front. And then the rear, obviously I haven't built it up yet, but the level of machining on these hubs is ridiculous. The rear is slightly deeper, so I've got the 55/50 version, so the 55 on the rear, 50 on the front, so not the deepest. Interesting to see the difference between the front wheel and the Windspace D67 front wheel that I have been riding for the road bike TTs. But it is pretty narrow. Well, it's not narrow. It's not narrow at all. It's 21mm internal, 28 external. So it's about the same as the Windspace. I think there's 21 on the Windspace front wheel and there's only 16 on here, but they're two cross both sides. So you've actually got more spokes doing the braking on here. You've got 8 rather than 7 on the Windspace, because on one side of the Windspace you've got radial spokes and they don't really take any braking loads. These wheels, are they worth the money? They're a bit more money than the rest of the Chinese wheels from Xiamen. I think, you know, they're north of 1600 US, so they're significantly more than the others. I have weighed them. They are 12.57 for the pair, validated. The claim is 12.50, so they're 7 grams over. It's like 0.5%. Quite like that, sort of like 2001 Space Odyssey type logo. But there's a bit of Chinglish on here, look, gone wrong. Maximan. I actually just took this 28mm Conti 5000 off a Windspace D67 front wheel. So like for like. These are much easier to get the tyres on these, on and off. The Windspace D67s are super tight. Now this is rated for a tubeless setup, this wheel set, but I did notice the tyre went on so much easier than the Windspaces. Another nice feature for the aerodynamics of this wheel is that the nipples at the rim edge are really recessed. They're barely poking out at all. Hardly any nipple on show. For this money, they should be supplying spare spokes, and there were none in the box. Now I know that these carbon spokes have a higher tensile strength than steel. They should last longer, but if you're doing a big trip like I'm about to do with this bike abroad, it's just nice to know you're going to have a backup, even if it gets damaged in the car, damaged on the plane. On a wheel set like that, which I am going to be taking, obviously you've just got CX Ray. Any shop's going to have a CX Ray straight pull, probably, but no shops are going to have these. They need to be differentiating a bit more from the other Chinese brands. The packaging, I think they could put in a couple of wheel bags. So I've had some cloth wheel bags recently from another company called 9 Velo for a mountain bike wheel set, and it was a really nice touch because they can be reused. They can be lobbed in the car so they don't get scratched. And when you've got a rim finish as good as that UD finish, you really want something to protect it. But anyway.
Anything to declare?
Yeah, don't go to England.
Right, here we are on location. Live update, second ride on these wheels. Unfortunately, there's a bigger issue with these wheels. I was getting a kind of creaking coming from the front wheel when out of the saddle, so when stood up over the saddle, even not when pedaling, so it's not torque related, it's not drivetrain related, and leaning the bike side to side, there was a clunk coming from the front wheel. So I checked everything was tight, checked the through axles are really tight, and they're really tight. There's like radial shift in that end cap. You can almost see it. So unlike most hubs where the axle comes through the bearing, this end cap forms part of the axle. That can work, it's done on Bitex hubs as well. But I think this cylinder is way undersized for that bearing, because it's a really loose fit in there. Look, it pulls out so easily. The only thing stops it falling out is that little O-ring. But the cylindrical fit is really shit, and it's really wobbly in there. There's loads of radial play. So yeah, it's a bit disappointing really. Good job I didn't take this as my only wheel set. Mate, this is going to get a roasting unfortunately. Fucking good job I took another front wheel, wasn't it? I've got another Fast Sports one in the boot. Lucky bugger. You lucky bugger.
Anything to declare?
Yeah, don't go to England.
I took a backup, and thank God I did. I took the old trusty Fast Sports rims, and if you've seen my first look review or first look kind of overview of these wheels on my Patreon page, you'll know they're pretty bling. They're pretty special. The specs are quite special. The weight is incredible, and the machining and the finishing is absolutely immense. Now, Joe and I have quite a good relationship. He has become a sort of friend of mine over the past 5-6 years. You know, we talk a lot about cycling, we talk a lot about racing, we talk a lot about living in Asia. I've lived in Hong Kong for 6-7 years. So we share a lot in common, and I'm really, really excited for his new business, Panda Podium. I think he's going to smash it. I think what he's doing is, no one's done it before, and he's already got off to a great start. But I said to him, you know, you're my mate, I want you to do well, but I'm not going to pull any punches when it comes to giving brands treatment when I don't agree with, you know, engineering principles or engineering design that they've done. And I am getting a little bit pissed off with the kind of current stream of alpha products I keep getting sent to test, stuff that isn't ready. I don't know if they know it's not ready and they want free engineering consulting or just an audit, but I'm getting a little bit annoyed. And if I'd have flown out to the Alps and I'd only been able to pack one wheel set and this was it, it would have pretty much ruined the riding. So we are working on a fix. They know now what's going wrong. They've taken my feedback and they're sending me some, you know, some updates, let's say, and I really hope this has the potential to become a really good product, because on the face of it, the finishing is insane. It's kind of a masterpiece when it comes to carbon wheels. It came apparent on actually the second ride when I basically just rode it back up the hill to the car after unpacking the car and putting the wheels on the bike in the Alps. I really want to send a message to these Chinese companies, or not just Chinese companies, any young companies that think they can get a free review off the Peak Talk YouTube channel. So you're not just going to get a raving review like the other channels give without even fucking riding them. The fix is already in the post, but stay tuned to find out a bit more about this wheel set. Now, really quickly, just to précis, what did I find wrong with the wheel set? Well, you'll see a little video clip of something I sent in a bit of a hot-headed moment to Joe when I was in the Alps and I unpacked the car. But basically, when I was going back up the climb after meeting my mates in Bourg Saint-Maurice on the very first day, when it was nice and quiet, I was climbing out the saddle, I could hear like a pinging coming from the front wheel. And it's something I never really experienced before. I thought, you know, being a bit of an anal engineer, like, my bike is always silent. It took me by a bit of surprise. So it took me about the whole climb to think, like, what is that noise? And obviously the only new thing on the bike was the front wheel. When I got back to the car, put the Fast Sports wheel on, problem went away. Put this wheel back on, problem came back. So it was definitely the front wheel. First of all, I thought it was the spoke seats kind of like settling in, because they are highly tensioned, highly stiff carbon spokes. Don't think it was that, and it turned out to be, as I prove in this video, the end caps, the tolerance of the end caps, the diameter of the end caps, because each end cap has basically a stub axle on it, are too small, and if you put quite a lot of load on the front wheel when you're out of the saddle, you get this kind of stick slip pinging as the end cap shunts around inside the inner race. I'd just like to point out at this stage that the rear hub is absolutely fine. It has a traditional axle layout. The axle, it has its own axle in the hub. It comes through the inner races of the bearing. It's a hard press fit on the inner races, and the end caps are like your normal push on end caps that the axle goes into, not the other way around. So it's only the front hub that has this issue. Now, this is where it all comes back down to the moral compass of certain YouTubers. Of course, I could tell you this wheel set is great by unboxing it, claiming I've ridden it for a couple of months, and it's actually quite rewarding to get a good product, put it through its paces for a good couple of months, treat it really hard, which you can do when you don't buy it, you can absolutely thrash it, pass on a discount to you, helps create sales for the company, and I get a bit of sales kickback. There's really no loser in that situation. But I could do the same with this. I could tell you it's great, it's a high price, it's a high ticket item, but this is where I'm trying to differentiate my channel from the others. If there's a problem with something, I will tell you, and I'm not going to give any affiliate codes or any links or whatever until I believe this is sorted out. So stay tuned for that, and be wary of other YouTubers who seem to just basically do a review off the back of an unboxing, which is something completely different. But we need to fix this, and yeah, that's just a little snippet about the moral compasses of YouTubers and sales commission and all that stuff. I went and got the Old Faithful back on the bike, the Fast Sports Revo. This is a wheel I've tested a lot for about 2 years now with a 180 rotor on it. It's pretty bomb-proof. It's not the lightest, but I know it's got 24 Sapphire CX race spokes and DT240. It's not going to go wrong. Anyway, that went on the bike. This one went in the boot of the 728i and did 5,000 kilometers around Europe without being ridden. So now I'm back in the workshop, I can measure the axle tolerances. And I want to just briefly explain to you how this hub system from CRW is different to most other hubs, because the end cap actually forms the axle as well. It's got a short stub axle on there. DT240 and most other hubs on the market, I would say 95% of hubs on the market have push-on end caps that actually go over the hub axle itself. That is how most hubs are done. It's a tried and proved method, and that's what we went back to. But before we get onto that, so the CRW is different, as I just said, because it doesn't have its own hub axle poking through. They use the end caps to essentially form the axle, and then inside you do have the normal kind of tube spacer like you get on a rear hub to help preload the inner races and provide some displacement preload. Now that's fine, this can be done properly. I have another hub down here, which is a wheel set I built myself. This is a Farsports TT wheel that I built myself with a Bitex RAF 12 hub with enduro bearings. Now that has the same stub axle design as the CRW hub on a much smaller scale. Obviously it's a much smaller bearing. But interestingly, this one has a thread on the end which actually threads into the middle tube spacer to make the whole assembly a bit stiffer. That's quite nice, and I really like that. The CRW doesn't have that. That's fine if all the tolerances are bang on and the preload tolerances are the bang on. And now it's not the preload here that I'm worried about. What's happening is essentially they're using this as the hub axle, and the hub axle would normally be quite a tight press fit inside the inner race of the bearing. This is too loose. This diameter that is forming the axle, what I call the stub axle, is very, very loose in the inner race of the bearing. You can hear that. There's a lot of play there. Now, that isn't so important, but you don't get that on a DT240 because the axle is solid inside. It's hard press fit inside, and then the end caps are a very hard press fit onto the axle. You know, if you've ever tried to take an end cap off a DT240, sometimes you actually need to use a vise to pull it off. Normally, you'd hope the load path, when this is all sandwiched in the bike frame by the through axle, which is providing a large clamping load, actually the load path should be from this tiny shoulder on the kind of inside here of the end cap, and then onto the side of the inner race, through the inner race, and then to the tube spacer in the center of the two bearings, and that should hold the load path. That's fine, and it does until you get out the saddle and you start leaning over the front wheel, and then the friction between that tiny shoulder on the end cap and the edge of the inner race is overcome, and then what starts to happen, I was feeling this weird stick slip phenomenon, and I was getting like a ticking that was vibrating up through the fork and even through the frame. I swapped the wheel at the car, problem went away. Put this wheel back in, problem came back. Come on then chaps, we're about to put our lives in the hands of 7 kilos of Chinese carbon, and I thought, yeah, this is quite serious. When you get a centre wheel like this and you've never ridden it before, that's why I didn't ride it on this trip. I'm just not taking any chances. Now there's up for a debate if this is a safety issue or not, but if that stick slip continuously happens, something on this is going to fatigue, this is going to get worn, this surface here, there may be a stress razor in the corner if it constantly shunts around. And personally, you know, these kind of alpine descents at 50, 60 kilometers an hour, up to 100 kilometers an hour, I don't want any play, stick slip, or even a potential hint of a safety issue in my front wheel. Because why are we taking the chances? What's the point? Why do I want to put my life in the hands of something that isn't perfect, especially when the risks are so high and the stakes are so high? I mean, we're not racing down these descents, but you're descending for 45 minutes up to 100 k's an hour. I don't want a front hub that is going to do that under load. Now on here there is an O-ring, and we'll pick that O-ring off. The O-ring doesn't do any sealing because there's nothing inside it, there's only the middle tube spacer, but if you can just drop the end cap out by tapping the hub, that is just absolutely non-acceptable. So why is that O-ring there? I reckon they made a batch of those too small, and they thought, well, we'll put an O-ring in it to stop it falling out of the inner race. I'm actually getting a little bit angry doing this video. I've measured this one. It is undersized, and we'll come on to that in a second. In engineering, if you've got a shaft going through a set of bearings, or any shaft and hole fit kind of scheme, you need what's called a shaft fit tolerance. Now, if I was designing a hub for myself, or if I was designing something like a DC motor that had 2 bearings in it, you know, a simply supported shaft, and I would design that with an H6 tolerance, an H6 sliding kind of semi-transition tolerance, that you could assemble it by hand. And an H6 is quite a tight tolerance, but it doesn't mean you need to press fit anything, so it would be perfect for an end cap because it basically wouldn't be falling out like it is. An H6 sliding tolerance on a shaft for a nominal 15mm axle would be undersized, would be 11 microns. So the minimum shaft diameter for this piece should be 14.989. Okay, we're down at 14.93. So that is massively undersized. And I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but 10 days later, I'm now at home with a basic pair of calipers and 14.94. I'll drop in some extra pictures if you can't see that. That is way, way, way undersized for any kind of axle in a nominal 15mm bearing. That's why it's sloppy. So the other side, and they are zeroed at 0, just in case you're wondering. The other side is a smidge better. It's about 10 microns bigger. I think it's a little bit bigger on this one. It feels a bit harder to pull out. I think it's pretty undersized. It should be at absolute minimums 14.98. That's 14.95, too small. 14.94. The clunk only happens when you overcome that, that friction off the shoulder, like I mentioned. There's a small shoulder on this face. If you get up of the saddle and out of the saddle and overcome that, and I'm, you know, 88 kilos at the moment. I'm 12 kilos under. I'm 12 kilos under the weight allowance. So it's nothing to do with saying that I'm a big guy. But then what are the chances that there's one bad pair out there and it also came to me? That compound probability, I think, is just, it's too slim to be a coincidence. So if you have got these wheels, I would say pull these out and measure them. If they're too small, if they're smaller than 0.98, so 14.98, if they're anything less than that, ask for a new set. Apart from that, I can't really say much about the wheels. You know, the carbon spokes we've seen before on other wheels, the rims are a very, very nice finish. It's all, you know, it's not painted so that you can see the layup is absolutely stunning. Now this is the end cap stub axle out of the Bitex hub. Let's just take a quick measurement of that one. 9.98. That's what it should be. That's closer. It's still not perfect, but it does have the benefit of it actually locking into the center of the inner tube spacer to create a stiffer axle. 9.94, 9.93, way, way too small. You might as well not even have the bloody cylinder on it and just go with the flange, which some hubs do. The DT350 doesn't have this stub axle at all. It requires all the load to go through that shoulder. And if you do overcome that, and I have found this on the mountain bike, the whole wheel clunks onto the through axle, which is really bad. So I really don't like the 350 design. I'm going to work with Joe to make these better and make sure they're absolutely what they should be. But I'm sick of doing engineering consulting or auditing without getting paid as a consultant. You know, if they don't know about shaft hole fit tolerance basis, H6, G6, whatever this needs to be, I've just done it for them for free, and it's kind of annoying. So fucking sort it out. Right, let's quickly bring the old faithful back into the picture. This is the FS Revo, Fast Sports Revo. Bomb-proof wheel, ridden it to death in the Alps, 19 hours, not a single issue. The 180's even gone discoloured. 15 exactly. 14.99, 15.00. See if I squeeze it harder. 14.99. Okay, I think I'll rest my case on this. Hear that? That's a hard press fit on that to get it back on. I know it's slightly different because there's another interface between the through axle and the end cap then. Sorry, the axle and then the end cap, but even that's a really hard press fit. That's not going to fall off in the back of the car, I'll put it like that. I've got a custom block which is mounted in a vise down here. This receives the M12 through axle. It's got an M12 by 1.5 thread in it. This is just a spacer and this is just an arm I mount the dial gauge off. And then the through axle is torqued up nice and hard, as hard as I can do it with a big Allen key before I feel like I'm rounding that off. There we go. Clunk. You can hear that stick slipping as I'm pushing left and right. And you get a tiny little clunk, and I'll just make sure that vise is done up mega tight. There we go. And when it does stick slip like that, you get that ping, and that it's like vibration. It goes up through the fork, and you can actually feel it in the handlebars. So, and I think it's as you overcome the friction of the shoulder on the inner race, it then clunks to the undersized kind of stub axles, and that's where you get the stick slip. Right, so these are the new end caps sent by Pandapodium. They were really quick to jump on this, and it's worth noting they've not swerved any responsibility through this whole thing. They've been taking a serious and keen and rapid interest in these QC issues. 14.98, 14.98. So they are much better. Now, like I said, they've not shirked any responsibility or, you know, stopped me putting this video up. They've been completely open, which is good. It's positive. They want to, you know, make a positive change and fail quickly and improve, which is really good. Absolutely no problem. The clicking problem when I'm getting out of the saddle is gone. These are a much better fit. There's obviously still some microscopic movement between this and the inner race, but it's not enough to do that stick slip clunking problem. I actually did the front and rear wheel stiffness test already, and even before I put these end caps in, I did that with the old end caps. And if I tested at a load which was plus minus 20 kilos on both sides, that wasn't actually enough to get this stick slipping, and the wheel stiffness off the test jig was really high, as you can see on these highlighted pair of bars on this chart here. They are pretty damn stiff. Now, considering the front wheel's only got 16 spokes, that's really impressive. Now, some people will say spoke tension doesn't affect wheel stiffness. In theory, Hooke's law, it doesn't, correct. However, in practice, it does, because if you've got really loose spokes or loose spokes, it changes the end constraint of the spoke nipple and the spoke seat. So if the spoke nipple or the spoke seat can actually pivot slightly and twist due to low tension, that's changing the boundary conditions of the system, and it's going to allow more total displacement at the edge of the rim. However, these are seriously stiff and the spoke tension is seriously high. Now, unfortunately, I can't do the aero test because of a problem you'll see here. I had a problem with the rear hub in the end. When I finally came to build up the rear wheel and put the rear brake on, I had a problem with the rear hub, so there's no aero data for this yet. Now, I'm going to reserve total judgment on this wheel set until I get a fully working replacement wheel set, one that's completely, in my eyes, finished. I do believe this wheel set has serious potential because of the finishing and the attention to detail in the production. I just think the QC and tolerances need to be polished a little bit. The aerodynamics, I still think the front wheel is going to be great because of the lack of spokes, and it's not too wide. So I'll be bringing you an aero test on this wheel, hopefully in due course when I get the rear working. But now I've seen the production 2D engineering drawing, the draft for these end caps, and I've seen the tolerance on there. It's 14.99 plus or minus 0.02, which will be bang on or well within the H6 kind of recommendation that I gave them. So that's a really good sign that the tolerance is on there. Whether it was on there from the beginning or they've done that since I had a go at them, I'm not so sure. Throughout the process, Joe from Pandapodium has been very positive about highlighting all these issues. He's not swerved anything, he's not denied anything, so hopefully I get a better set. Now, for the first time, I'm trying to use the rear wheel, and what the hell is going on in this Heath Robinson rig, I hear you ask? Well, I've got 6 kilos here, hanging off 0.3 of a metre in this bag, and I can't tighten the disc lock ring. It's a standard Shimano lock ring. I've used it before, nothing wrong with that, and I can't bottom it on the disc. Even when I put 40 Newton meters on it, it won't close up the gap. Let's have a look at this. Let's put this in the bag, and you'll see that that won't even turn, and that's 18 Newton meters. It's not turning the lever at all. Pretty bad. I'm putting on way more than 40 Newton meters right now. Got my hand on top of the wheel to stop it moving out of the vise, and that's miles away from being tight. Right, here's another wheel set, and this is exactly how it should be. That's running free. Whip it round. It's not, look, just let it fall. No movement in the disc. So free running thread until it hits the end, and that's how it should be. So I've removed the lock ring, and you can see how tight that's been. It's actually galled away the threads on the inside there. The anodizing's come off. I don't think it's damaged the threads. It's not cross-threaded it or anything. It's just pulled the anodizing off. But yeah, it's just too tight. I guess the threads go in fine before it gets anodized, and then after anodizing it just gets too stiff. And now I've got the new end caps for the front. That's sorted out, but I can't actually ride the wheel set front and rear because of this issue.